At Grandpa's 89th birthday, everything looked picture perfect until my husband leaned in and whispered, "Get your bag, we're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." I blinked. The cake hadn't even been cut. My mom was mid-toast. Heather was beaming. Guests were sipping champagne from plastic flutes. And here was Roger, gripping my wrist under the table like we were in danger. I thought he was overreacting, maybe just tired from the long drive. But 5 minutes later, in the car, he locked the doors, stared straight ahead, and said, "Something's very, very wrong." I didn't laugh that time. I called the police. The garden was decked in white and gold. Folding chairs fanned out beneath strings of paper lanterns, and polite jazz hummed from a Bluetooth speaker hidden behind the punch bowl. My mom had gone all out as usual. Heather, my older sister, stood front and center with a camera in one hand and a wine flute in the other, posing like the party was her moment. It should have been comforting, familiar, but it wasn't. Roger and I had driven 6 hours from Boston for this. I hadn't seen most of my extended family in years. And when I walked into the backyard that afternoon, I was hit by a strange dissonance. People I barely remembered hugging me like we were close, calling me Maddie like it hadn't been 2 Christmases since we last spoke. I stood by the food table, pretending to enjoy grape skewers while scanning the crowd. Where was Grandpa? He was the only reason I came. Roger joined me, holding a glass of white wine and wearing that expression he gets when he's quietly miserable, tight smile, distant eyes. I knew better than to ask if he was okay. He'd say he was. He always did. My mom swept past us in a whirlwind of perfume and false warmth. "Madeline, you made it!" Finally. She kissed the air next to my cheek, then moved on before I could respond. I caught a glimpse of her touching up her lipstick behind a napkin a few minutes later. She was crying, or at least trying to. That was the Harper brand emotion, but curated. Then they wheeled Grandpa out. He wore a cream sweater vest and navy slacks. His hair was brushed back neatly, and a pair of glasses perched low on his nose. Everyone clapped like he'd just walked the red carpet. But something inside me froze. He looked fine. Too fine. Like a stage version of himself. He didn't wave. He didn't even blink much. His face was calm, passive, like he was only half there. I told myself it was just age, that maybe he was tired. Mom leaned in during the toast and whispered, "He doesn't talk much these days. It's hard for him." Then she lifted her glass and began the speech, choking up just enough to make it about her. 89 years of brilliance, she said. Of family, strength, sacrifice. He built our world. People teared up. A woman behind me actually whispered, "Beautiful." But I noticed something else. Roger wasn't clapping. He was staring at Grandpa. Or the man in the chair. I nudged Roger gently. "Hey," I whispered. "You okay?" He didn't answer. He just kept watching Grandpano, the man in the chair with that still, focused stare I'd seen only a handful of times in our years together. It was the look he wore when something didn't add up, when his brain was scanning a scene like a detective. "Roger?" I tried again, this time lightly touching his arm. He leaned in, close enough that I could feel his breath against my ear. His voice was low, flat, unshakable. "Get your bag, we're leaving. Act like nothing's wrong." I blinked. I almost laughed. "You're kidding, right?" He didn't smile. His eyes didn't shift. He was watching that man like he expected him to stand up and pull a gun from under the blanket. "Smile," he said. "Walk inside. Pack. Now." I stared at him like he was crazy. "Roger, what are you talking about? We just got here." He finally turned to look at me. "Something's very, very wrong." It wasn't what he said, it was how calm he was. Like he was naming a fact, not making a guess. Like he was saying, "The sun rises in the east." Like he was telling me gravity existed. That's when my hands started shaking. I glanced back at Grandpa. He hadn't moved. His hands rested on the armrest like props. His head nodded slightly with each sentence of the toast, but it felt rehearsed. Synchronized. Too measured. Roger was already walking toward the house. I hesitated. If he was wrong, this was going to be humiliating. But if he was right, I followed. Inside the guest room, I unzipped our overnight bag with trembling fingers. I could barely breathe. My mind spiraled. Had something happened? Was this about Grandpa's health? Did Roger overhear something? When we stepped out the front door, No one stopped us. Not a glance. Not a single raised eyebrow. Roger opened the passenger door for me like we were in a spy movie. Once inside, he hit the lock button. All the doors clicked shut. Then, gripping the steering wheel, he said quietly, "That's not your grandfather." My brain stuttered. "Excuse me?" He didn't look at me. "I remember faces," he said. "Every detail. That man's ears? They're different. His posture? Off. The real Arthur Harper had a slight droop in his right shoulder from a work accident in '83. This guy? Perfectly straight." I couldn't process it. I didn't want to. I pressed my fingers against my temples. "You think someone dressed up as him?" "Not a mask," Roger said. "Makeup, glasses, mannerisms. Enough to pass for people who want to believe." I felt sick. "Then where is he?" I whispered. Roger said nothing. The silence was worse than any answer. We sat in the car like two people who had just committed a crime or maybe just narrowly escaped one. Roger's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I was frozen mid-motion, my seatbelt only halfway clipped. Like if I didn't fasten it fully, none of this would be real. I kept staring out the window at the backyard, at the floating lanterns and clinking glasses, at Heather laughing too loudly and my mom wiping her eyes for the third time in 10 minutes. The party hadn't stopped. It hadn't even slowed. Nothing looked wrong from the outside. But now everything felt wrong. I turned to Roger, searching for something rational in all this. "Okay, say you're right. Say that's not Grandpa. What does that mean? Where is he?" "I don't know," he said, eyes locked on the house. My stomach dropped. I thought of the last Zoom call I'd had with Grandpa. 3 years ago. He was tired but lucid. Told me a story about how squirrels kept stealing tomatoes from his garden. I remembered laughing. I remembered the light in his kitchen behind him. And then he disappeared. Not dramatically, just slowly. Fewer texts. My calls went unanswered. Mom always had an excuse. "He's resting. It's been a rough week. You know how age is." I wanted to believe it. I did believe it because the alternative was too horrifying. But sitting in that car, staring at the house I'd once played tag around as a kid, something cracked inside me. "You need to call someone," Roger said softly. I looked at him. "You mean the police?" He nodded. "We don't have proof, but if this is what I think it is, they'll find it." I hesitated. My hand hovered over my phone like it weighed 50 pounds. I was picturing Mom's face, how she'd smile that tight, rehearsed smile and say I was being dramatic. How Heather would roll her eyes and call me jealous again. How every cousin and neighbor would whisper about the self-important one from Boston who ruined everything. "I'm going to ruin this family," I whispered. Roger turned to me. His voice was quiet, but firm. "You're not the one who did that." I swallowed, pressed the call button. The dispatcher answered with calm efficiency. I stumbled through the explanation as best I could. "I know this sounds insane," I said, "but I believe someone is impersonating my grandfather, and I don't know where he is or if he's even alive." There was a pause. Then, "We're sending a unit." I ended the call and stared straight ahead, my heart thudding like a war drum. Roger reached over and gently buckled my seatbelt for me. And then we waited. 5 minutes later, 2 plainclothes officers walked up the driveway like they were delivering a package. From inside the house, nothing changed. No screaming, no running. Just the sound of polite music and something tightening in the air. The officers didn't storm in. They didn't raise their voices or flash badges. They just slipped through the side gate, nodding politely as if they were late guests. For a while, it looked like nothing had changed. My mom kept circulating, refilling glasses with cheap champagne. Heather posed for selfies with the fake grandpa in the wheelchair. Guests kept smiling, but their eyes flicked sideways now. Their laughter grew thinner, more nervous. Then I saw one of the officers pull my mom aside. She tensed instantly, her hands stilled, her mouth kept moving fast, defensive. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I recognized the posture. She wasn't confused, she was cornered. Dad stood off by the grill, staring at the hedge like it might tell him what to do. And the man in the wheelchair, the one who was supposed to be Arthur Harper, just sat there. Didn't speak, didn't blink much, didn't react when an officer knelt beside him and asked something. Then my mom disappeared into the house and came back holding what looked like an ID. The officer glanced at it. His face didn't change. Nothing changed. That was the most terrifying part, though quiet it all was. Then the fake grandpa looked up. He spoke just a few words. I couldn't hear them. And he nodded. Roger whispered beside me, "It's over." But it wasn't. One of the officers returned to our car. His face was unreadable. "Can you stay nearby?" he asked. "We'll be in touch soon." I leaned forward. "Is it him?" The officer hesitated. "We're still confirming some things." "But you know it's not him," I said quietly. He didn't confirm, but he didn't deny it either. Then he walked away. Roger exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for the last half hour. But I couldn't move. Because if that man wasn't Grandpa, then where the hell was he? The question hit me like a fever. 3 years of unanswered calls. 3 years of, "He's resting, he's not well, maybe next week." I thought I was being paranoid, overly sensitive, the dramatic one who moved away. But now? Now I wondered if I hadn't been screaming into a void this whole time. That night, our hotel room was cold despite the thermostat. I curled up on the bed fully clothed, the blankets barely helping. My phone buzzed just past midnight. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. I answered. "How could you?" My mother's voice, shaking not from sadness, but fury. "You called the police, on your own family." I didn't speak. "You have no idea what we've been through. You weren't here, you left." My voice came out small. "Where is he, Mom?" Silence. Then a click. She hung up. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, counting every breath like it might anchor me back to something solid. Roger had drifted off beside me, one hand resting on my shoulder like a quiet anchor. But even that didn't help, because all I could think about was Grandpa. I could still hear his voice, deep, raspy, warm, always full of some quiet amusement, like he knew something you didn't yet, but he was proud you were trying to figure it out. He used to let me sit on the workbench in his garage while he carved things out of wood bookends, toys, picture frames. Once, he made a tiny compass box and said, "For when the world feels lost, but you aren't." Back then, it felt like he was mine. And then life happened. I left for college, got married, moved to Boston, started my architecture firm. We stayed in touch, texts, emails, the occasional video call, but over the last 3 years he had faded. Or been faded. I asked to speak to him on birthdays, on holidays. Mom always intercepted. "He's napping." He had a rough night. He wouldn't recognize you now. Some part of me wanted to believe that maybe he'd grown distant with everyone, that it wasn't personal. But deep down, I think I knew. He never would have let go like that. Not of me. He was the only one in the family who never made me feel like a disappointment. The only one who didn't compare me to Heather, didn't act like I was selfish for leaving town, for not coming back every Thanksgiving. And now, maybe he was gone. And maybe he had been for a long, long time. I sat up in bed and turned on my laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for, anything. Something. I opened my old email inbox, the one I used before college. I hadn't touched it in years. Hundreds of messages, mostly junk. But then I found one. From Arthur Harper. Subject: just in case. Date: March 14, 2020. My heart stopped. I opened it. "Maddie, if something ever seems off, trust your instincts. You always had a good compass. There are things I've set aside for you, not because I expect anything from you, but because you deserve the truth. The folder is in the garage, behind the old blueprint cabinet. You'll know it when you see it. I love you, Grandpa." I pressed a hand to my mouth. I hadn't seen this message. Maybe it landed in spam. Maybe I wasn't checking that inbox. Maybe I didn't want to believe there was something to question. But now? Now, I was sure. I turned to Roger, eyes wide. "We have to go back." The next morning, we drove back to the house. Not to confront anyone. Not yet. We waited until the backyard was quiet, the last of the party remnants swept away, lanterns gone, chairs stacked by the porch. I parked a block down and walked the rest of the way. My heart pounded with every step, but the email burned in my mind. Behind the blueprint cabinet, he said I'd know it. I did. Grandpa's garage was always half workbench, half memory vault. When I pushed open the side door, it creaked exactly like it used to when I was 8. The light switch flickered once before staying on. Dust danced in shafts of sunlight slicing through the blinds. And there it was, the old blueprint cabinet. Metal, blue, covered in faded decals from national parks and old Union stickers. I hesitated for just a second, then pulled it forward with both hands. Behind it was a wooden box. Simple, no lock, just my name carved faintly across the top in his handwriting. Inside were envelopes, dozens of them. One was labeled, "If they tell you I'm resting, don't believe them." Another, "The real account is under your name." And at the bottom, folded in careful quarters, was a copy of his will. A real one, with my name listed clearly as sole heir, dated before the ones my mother had flaunted years ago. My knees buckled. Roger caught me before I hit the floor. "We take this to the police," he said softly. "Now." We drove straight to the station. No detours, no second guessing. The officers already knew something was off, but when we handed over the letters, the original will, and Grandpa's email, their postures shifted. Suddenly, we weren't just making noise. We were backing it up. They thanked us, promised updates, told us not to contact the family just yet. That lasted all of 12 hours. Because the next evening, Heather showed up at our hotel. I opened the door, shocked to see her dressed like she hadn't slept, mascara smudged under her eyes. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Her voice was low, raw. "You couldn't just leave it alone?" I stared at her. "Leave what alone? Grandpa?" She flinched. "You don't understand what it was like. After he got sick, Mom panicked. She didn't want anyone to know. He didn't want hospitals. He said he was tired. And that gave you the right to hide his death?" Heather blinked fast. "We weren't trying to steal anything. We didn't want it to be over." I felt my jaw tighten. "So you hired someone to pretend to be him? Dress him up in Grandpa's clothes? Roll him out at his birthday like some morbid puppet show?" "He was a friend," she said quickly. "A veteran Grandpa knew. Mom offered him money. It wasn't meant to go this far." I stepped back. The air in the room felt poisonous. "You weren't grieving," I said. "You were rewriting. You erased me. You erased him." She didn't reply. She just left. No apology, no tears. Just a quiet retreat, like the shame hadn't reached her yet. But the truth had already started spreading. 3 days later, a local blog ran the story. Then a neighbor posted footage from the party. The video went viral. A dead man's birthday. A fake grandfather. A family who lied. And in the comments, people asked the same question over and over again. Where is Evelyn Harper? Because that's what his will revealed. Arthur Harper wasn't just my grandfather. He was my guardian after my father died. He changed my name legally when I turned 13 after my mother tried to cut ties. I was his daughter in every way that mattered. And that fake man in the chair? He didn't know any of that. Didn't flinch when someone called me Maddie. Didn't react to the nickname Evie he'd whispered only to me. That's when I knew. The face wasn't right. Because it didn't recognize me. And Grandpa always did. The lawyer's email arrived 2 days later. Subject line: Arthur Harper, final instructions. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for nearly 20 minutes, hand frozen on the mouse. Part of me was still waiting for someone to show up and tell me this was all a mistake, that Grandpa was fine, that this was just grief playing tricks, that no one had buried the truth. But I clicked. Inside was a short message from Mr. Benton, Grandpa's longtime attorney. The words were measured, professional yet kind. Dear Miss Harper, your grandfather left behind specific instructions for you, including a personal video, a trust folder, and a series of asset documents that were never disclosed to the rest of the family. I've attached a secure archive below. He wanted you to know none of this was an accident. There was a link, password protected. I checked the folder behind the blueprint cabinet again. Taped to the inside of the lid was a sticky note. Evie Compass 2020. I entered it. The folder unlocked. Inside, a scan of the official will, the one they didn't want me to find. A video file labeled, For Evie. A document titled, Statement of Beneficiary Assets. I clicked the video first. Grandpa sat at his old desk. Same sweater I remembered. Same reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose. He looked directly at the camera. Maddie, or should I say Evelyn, if you're watching this, it means you figured it out or someone forced your hand. I always worried your mother might take liberties. She never liked that I wanted you to inherit directly. She thought it was too much responsibility for someone who lives in a city apartment. He smiled faintly. A tired smile, not bitter, just sad. You were always mine, Evie. In every way that counts. I gave Heather and your mother everything they needed when I was alive. But the rest, the house, the land, the retirement fund, the business dividends, those are yours. I felt something swell in my throat. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I saw how you treated people. Quietly, kindly, without expecting applause. I know, I'm probably gone now, and I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye properly, but I trust you'll do something better with all this. He leaned closer to the lens. Let them rage, let them curse your name, but don't give them your peace, Evelyn. The screen went dark. I stared at the blank monitor, heart pounding. He had known. He had known everything. I opened the assets document next, a list unfolded, carefully itemized. Family home appraised at 680, 0. Retirement accounts. 1.1 M. Private stock in Harper Tools, 800, 0. Land parcel in Vermont, 320, 0. Trust account in my name, 250, 0. Residuals from licensing patents ongoing. No debts, no liens, just legacy, clean and deliberate. All in my name. Not shared, not split. Just mine. That's why they had lied, why they kept me away. Why they invented a man to sit in a wheelchair and nod while they siphoned the past away like it belonged to them. Because they couldn't change Grandpa's will. So they tried to erase me. The eviction wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no viral clips of my mother begging on the front lawn. Just a quiet court order, a formal deadline, and a moving truck that came 3 days early. I wasn't even there. I couldn't be. I didn't need to watch them leave. I only returned once the house was empty. The keys still worked. The front door opened with a groan, and the scent of lemon polish and sawdust hit me like a wave of memory. The furniture was gone. So were the curtains, the photographs except one. On the hallway wall, someone had forgotten to take the old picture of Grandpa and me at my high school graduation. We were both smiling, his hand on my shoulder. That picture shouldn't have still been there. But it was. I walked to the dining room, the room they'd used for every birthday, every Christmas, every moment I was never fully invited to. And I sat down. At the head of the table. Not out of pride, not out of vengeance, but because it was the seat Grandpa had always left empty for me. Evie's spot, he'd called it, even when I wasn't home, even when no one else believed I would ever come back. That night, I opened a bottle of wine, the kind he used to hide in the pantry behind the canned beans. I drank quietly, alone, listening to the creaks in the floorboards, to the ghosts of arguments and laughter and things unsaid. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. For the first time, I wasn't a visitor in this house. I wasn't the outsider. I wasn't the girl who moved away or the one who got too big for the family. I was his. And they had always known that. That's why they tried so hard to erase me. There was a note left on the kitchen counter, folded once, no envelope. You always were good at taking what you didn't earn. Mom. I read it. Then I burned it. Right there, in the kitchen sink. The ashes curled inward and disintegrated into the drain. I haven't heard from them since. No voicemails, no threats, no lawsuits, just silence. Sometimes, I wonder if I went too far. Other times, I wonder if I didn't go far enough. But every time I ask myself that, I remember the man in the chair. The one who nodded like he'd known me all his life. And didn't flinch when I called him Grandpa. Because he wasn't. And the real one? He left me everything I needed to know. In wood shavings, in quiet gifts, in whispered memories no one could fake. I finish the wine, blow out the candle, and whisper into the stillness of his house. I'm home, Grandpa.